I think that quickly in the next few years, college is no longer going to be higher ed. Higher ed is something else entirely. It's anybody that goes on to get a different, more advanced skill set in some area, but it's not necessarily through a college system anymore.
Whether you're developing a new student housing community or acquiring an existing one, fast and reliable internet isn't a luxury, it's a necessity. But when it comes to serving college students, standard telco providers often fall short on both performance and support. Don't risk a frustrating experience for you and your residents. Choose Campus Technologies, a provider with nearly 25 years of expertise in delivering top-tier internet infrastructure and exceptional customer service for student housing nationwide. Beyond high-speed wired and wireless internet, Campus Technologies also offers managed IT services to keep your property management team running smoothly at their properties. Even if you're not currently in the market for a provider, you need to know the best practices for upgrading your property's internet infrastructure. Download their latest white paper today. You can find the link in the show notes or visit campustechnologies.com. What's up, everyone, and welcome to the Student Housing Insight Podcast. I'm your host, Wesley Deese. I'm also the CEO of Student Housing Insight. If this is your first time joining us, Student Housing Insight is a platform for off-campus student housing professionals to network, share ideas, as well as data, and you can find out more about our platform at studenthousinginsight.com. In addition to the podcast and some of the other content that we create, we also host the industry's monthly webinar for the U.S. called Shop Talk, and the SHOP stands for Student Housing Operations. Each month, we provide a legislative and policy update that are impacting our industry, and that specifically comes from the National Multi-Housing Council, which is based in DC. And then Shop Talk also provides a monthly overview of pre-leasing data on a national and a regional basis, along with a panel of operators who will also provide their on-the-ground observations as to what's happening from a pre-leasing standpoint. Now, this episode should be coming out sometime in early to mid-September. Obviously, a lot of the data that we're kind of looking at right now is really just wrapping up the fall 2025. And so be on the lookout for that. We may be able to cover some of that in the Shop Talk for September, which is on September 11th. But if you're catching this after the September 11th Shop Talk, make sure that you tune in. It's on the second Thursday in October, and we'll be giving a recap of where everybody landed for fall 25, and we'll start talking about what's ahead for fall 26 and where things have kind of started for the next cycle, because now it's just a year-long cycle. Every year, it's no longer starting in November. It starts pretty much right after move-in is over with. But getting back to Shop Talk, we also typically provide a topic of the month as well. So a lot of great information, and if you are involved with the operations of student housing in the U.S., regardless if it's as a service provider, or if you're actually in the industry as a on-site manager or a regional manager or even a CEO of a company, you should definitely be registered to receive our monthly invites. You can register to receive those as well as review prior Shop Talk webinars by going to shoptalk.info. Again, that's shoptalk.info. And we'll provide a link to that as well as anything else that we cover on this podcast. We will always provide those in the show notes so that you can go to them there and not have to necessarily write them down. Well, guys, we've got a very special episode today. It's very different from a lot of the topics we cover. Obviously, a lot of what we cover has to do with the business and the operations around student housing. And this is a little bit different because we're really talking about higher ed and the future of higher ed. And I'm not looking we all know a lot of the problems, especially what we're facing in the US today when it comes to the enrollment cliff and what's happening with international students. And then there's also just this overall value that higher ed is able to give to its end customer. And we're going to cover some of those problems. I'm not here to solve those problems. And I expect if you're listening to this, you're not here to solve those problems either. But I do want to gain a better understanding of those problems. And more so, I want to be able to help this audience, which are, mostly site level managers up to the CEOs of a lot of these large management companies, and really just kind of talk about how we should be thinking about these changes that are happening and making sure that we're preparing both the properties and our staff as well as our clients for what's ahead. And there may be some physical changes. Some of it may be just from a marketing standpoint. And there's an important group that I've kind of alluded to here, which are those students that are not necessarily seeing the value of higher education. And to them, it's not necessarily worth them doling out 100 grand over the course of 4 to 5 years to get a degree in something that they may have a really hard time recouping that investment out of. And more importantly, they may end up finding out that it's in a field or something that they don't even really care about, that they don't even want to kind of build their life around. And so that's something really important that I think a lot of Gen Zers, and I think we'll see it even more with Gen Alpha, of how they're approaching that decision of if they're going to go to college or not. So I've got a very special guest today, and she's very highly qualified to talk about this. Her name is Hannah Maruyama. She is one of the founders of, along with her husband, of Degree Free, which if you want to find out more information, go to degreefree.com. But she started this several years ago to really kind of help students that are, and I shouldn't say students, but let's say high school students starting around age 16 to adults up to age 20 who are really trying to figure out if, one, is college something that they need to do, and two, how's the best way to if it is college, or if it is something, if it's another track, how's the best way to pay for that and not be in debt? So it's a little bit radical than the way higher ed has been, how people have approached higher ed in the past, and it's something that's gaining a lot of momentum. I know Hannah because my daughter went through her program. My oldest daughter, who is about to turn 20, basically we came across Hannah through some of our homeschool networks, and across her podcast. You can also find her podcast by searching Degree Free on YouTube or wherever you get your podcast from. And it just, what came of that, we'll talk about this a little bit in the podcast itself, or in the interview itself. So I'm not going to go into a lot of detail, but I was really impressed with the process that Hannah took my daughter Peyton through, and we've kind of have kept discussing, our worlds and how things are impacting higher ed. And we were like, hey, this needs to be a podcast. We need to have an interview and kind of talk about how, for these students who are degree free, I mean, that's the label I'll put on them, as they're degree free students, how they're approaching housing, and how we as student housing providers can actually help them with that. And so we shouldn't be really just focused on, the 18 to 24-year olds that are, coming through the college campus. We really need to be focused on, everybody in that age group that is, we've spent a lot of time in this industry creating and evolving this bridge between living on campus and living on their own. And just because a person didn't start out on campus and they've got a little bit of a different journey, it doesn't mean that the buildings and facilities that we're developing and we're managing and maintaining isn't the right answer for them. And what we found out is it is very clearly the right answer for a lot of these degree free students. So with that being said, here's my interview with Hannah from Degree Free. So Hannah, I mean, what's your opinion? I mean, is Gen Z and Gen Alpha, are they just Is their perspective completely flipped on the value of higher education?
I think the colleges have really created an uphill battle for themselves. I think that they have squandered a foregone conclusion that after high school, you go straight to college because Gen Z and then Gen Alpha is a wild card. I haven't really talked to too many of those just yet. They're still a little bit young and honestly, a little bit terrifying. If you've talked to a Gen Alpha kid, they're a little terrifying, not in a bad way, and very much in a you know what? I don't know what the world's gonna look like with you guys in charge, but it's gonna be quite something. But Gen Z, I will say, seems to me on a whole to be fairly cautious, a lot more financially aware, and a lot harder working than people give them credit for. I think that a lot of them are looking for things in life, the things that they want out of life as a whole. I think are a lot closer to maybe what their grandparents wanted, which is, a home, possibly being able to have a one income household, being able to really be able to have time for the people and the things that they want to do in their life. And so the way they look at work has fundamentally changed. It's not this, I'm going to get a big career job because I'm going to go work 80 hours a week. What they really want to do, and it's not that they're not hardworking because they actually hold on average 4 jobs, they work a lot. Gen Z is very willing to work. They'll bag groceries. They're not afraid of doing work that other people might look down on. They just don't really care. They're going, this is effective, this schedule works for me, this hourly works for me, or I'm willing to do what I have to do in order to get into certain goals. And this is the age demographic that I work with. So that's what I've seen. They're very much concerned with the way that their life is going to look, and then they will figure out what they need to do in order to get to that life, whatever that is. And I think the colleges don't really fit in anymore as a first purchase to pursue that life because, on average, the NCES estimate for the cost of a bachelor's degree is $104,000. And if they take 5.5 years to graduate, which 60% of kids do, now you're looking at 156K. That's not a small amount of money. And I think that Gen Z looks at that and goes, I don't have very many $100,000 bullets to just use in my life. I only have so many of them. And I think by and large, what's happening is they're going, if I spend this at 17, 18, I won't be able to buy a house, which is math that millennials probably should have done because that's the reason that they can't buy houses. They went and bought a piece of paper instead of buying a house. And so now they're not able to buy houses. But Gen Z, I think, is a little bit more they're more lifestyle driven than they are status driven. I think
Mm,
millennials went, I'm going to go get the paper, I'm going to go get the big job, I'm going to look some sort of way. And then Gen Z has seen the fallout of that in siblings or in really
yeah.
young parents if their parents are millennials or elder millennials, and they've just gone, this doesn't serve the life that I want, so I'm not going to do this. And I think that that's actually the reason for the drop in enrollment.
Yeah. So let's talk really quick about who you are and why you've got this insight into that perspective, because what we're talking about today isn't necessarily, we're not going to try to figure out higher ed's problems and how to fix them. They're smart people. They can figure that out themselves, or they can, um,
Deal with the
they'll,
fallout.
they'll deal with the fallout. I mean, that's kind of the great thing about capitalism, I guess, is you'll end up being judged for what you're able to produce. And I think there's been post Vietnam, there's been a lot of things in place that have really allowed them to get away with not providing a lot of value. But I certainly think every country has got to make higher education a priority to be a thriving civilization. So I'm certainly not poo pooing higher ed. I just think there's a lot of things that have got to be worked out, and we'll see how they ultimately respond to it. But for our audience, and that being mostly owners and operators in the off-campus student housing world, there's some things that, as you and I have talked, and we'll talk a little bit about how we know each other and that type of thing. But there's some things that we've talked about that we're like, from your standpoint, you were like, hey, some of my clients really need to understand this about off-campus student housing. And I was like, hey, a lot of my audience needs to understand that all of their students, or all of their residents, I should say, may look like students, but in the future they may not necessarily be going to the campus that they're a half a mile or a couple blocks away from. So yeah, I want to get into that discussion, but before we go any further, let's do a proper introduction. If you could tell us a little bit about yourself, what your journey has been, and what degree free is all about.
Sure. My name is Hannah Maruyama. I am the CEO and founder of Degree Free. At Degree Free, we help 16 to 20-year-olds find incredible jobs, amazing careers without buying college degrees. And those range from software development to sommelier to phlebotomist to watchmakers and pretty much anything you can think of under the sun. Only 7.7% of all the jobs in the US actually require college degrees. 62% of high school seniors go directly from high school into college. Only 41% of those who do go to college end up leaving because it's not the right fit and they shouldn't be there because there's a giant mismatch of the available jobs that require degrees and jobs that pay enough to make it worth getting the degree. And that is quickly showing in our culture, in our society. People are starting to question the value of not higher education, but college, which are no longer synonyms. And really, something I say frequently is that they aren't synonyms and they never have been. But colleges are an
Mm,
$48 billion industry, and they've done a very good job marketing that those are synonymous so that people will, without thinking about the ROI, without looking at whether or not a college degree is actually going to serve their child's larger goals, just send them directly into college. But there's a few things happening at once that are causing the decline in enrollment. So, something you and I talked about, Wes, is going to be, just the fact that there's less kids than there were. So now there's less students that can be enrolled in college. Two, the cost. College tuition doubles every 9 years. Wages have stagnated. Employers A survey of employers from intelligent.com recently just reported that 71% of them have fired a recent Gen Z college graduate that they've hired within the last year. And that's because colleges are not teaching students really anything that's super useful in an employment situation. And more than that, they're inflating their expectations for wages. And it's creating an unfortunate relationship between employers and recent grads because they're immediately dissatisfied with entry level work because they think they're going to walk into a six-figure job when they're going to walk into a $40,000 job, $40,000 a year job. And they have all this debt they have to serve. So Gen Z is just becoming skeptical of whether or not they should purchase a college degree. And because of that, they're now, and their parents as a result, are looking for alternative options. They want better ways to figure out what they're going to do. They want more practical career options. They want a more clear understanding of the ROI of what they're going to do, and they want to reduce the financial risk at the beginning. Also, because a lot of parents have student loans that they still have not paid off. And that's something that we're beginning to see, that actually the largest group that's currently taking out student loans is grandparents because the parents are already tapped out. And so that's something that starts to affect other areas of their life. You have two income households that are both working. They still have student loans, and now they're thinking about taking out student loans for their child. But if they do so, then if they co-sign those loans, they're going to have to liquidate 401ks, keep working, take out HELOCs, do things that are fairly radical in order to afford the six-figure purchase that now no it really doesn't have a clear guarantee of making that money back. And because of that, now parents do want to launch their kids responsibly. They want their kids to go out into the world. That desire is still there, but what's no longer there is the conviction that college is the best way to do that.
right.
And I think too, you combine this with the fact that AI is changing the way that education is going to be accessible to people. Now, AI is not taking new grad jobs. That's not what's happening, but it's definitely changing the way education is being administered. And so when we talk about higher ed, I think that quickly in the next few years, college is no longer going to be higher ed. Higher ed is something else entirely. It's anybody that goes on to get a different, more advanced skill set in some area, but it's not necessarily through a college system anymore. But a huge part of the market that student housing fills is that really controlled landing place that's safe, that
Right.
has people and community of similar ages, and parents are able to go, "Okay, I can put you somewhere, I can send you somewhere that's not in our house, thank goodness. I can send you out of this house, but I can send you somewhere where there's a little bit of oversight, where there's a little bit of rules, where there's a
There's
little bit of
it's
security.
there's a bridge. I mean, that we've said that in student housing for years is we're kind of creating that bridge between being a student, being part of mom and dad's tax form each year, and becoming an independent person. And so, no, that's exactly right. And yeah, I want to just bring up a couple of headlines, and you provided some great data there. But this is from Business Insider within I can't remember. Let's see what's the date here. May 19th, 2025. Title is From PowerPoint to Plumbing Inside Gen Z's Pivot to Blue Collar Jobs. Fantastic article that's talking about, students that are just looking at what is it? I shouldn't say students, but specifically high school graduates, as well as some college graduates that it talks about and how they're just making that pivot. And then also, this came out recently in Campus Reform. Survey shows nearly 1 in 4 Gen Z workers regret college, with men most likely to question its values, which is I think you said it's a pretty indicting article to say.
Well, so the clients that we work with are all 16 to 20 years old, and I would say the largest percentage of them are definitely male because male and honestly have been to college for about a year before they leave and they break out because it just doesn't make sense and they were there for no clear reason. And that is the largest group that I think is really affected by going to college because they think they have to and they think that that's the only way to get a good job when that's just no longer the case.
Yeah. I want to jump in. This is a graph from NCES's website, and I wish we had a little bit newer data on this trend graph because it goes from 2012 to 2022. There's been a lot that's happened between 2022 and and 2025, and
Yes.
I would really like to see how this works out. But what you're seeing here are got a black line at the top, yellow, and then purple. The black is the percentage of a total number of students that are enrolling coming right out of high school. So immediate college enrollment is what that's referred to as. And you could tell 2012, okay, it's 66%, and it's 62 10 years later. But you kind of look at the story here in the middle, you go back to 2016 and it was 70%. So we've seen a decline between 2016 and 2022 of 8%. And that's going to both secondary or to both 4-year schools and 2-year institutions, which I think you're right. In the discussion we had earlier reviewing this, I think that probably includes some trade schools in that as well. And this shows a little bit of a bump up in 4-year between 2021 and 2022. But as I've discussed on this podcast a lot, we all know what happened, especially in fall of 2021, in the middle of COVID, and knowing that international students were not going to be coming back. There was, especially about a lot of the state flagship institutions, they opened up the floodgates and they didn't have to have SAT or ACT scores. And so it's been pretty open gate, especially between 2020 and 2022, which is where we see those increases for 4-year institutions. So I think that probably explains that. I'm really interested in seeing an updated version of this, but it does clearly show that over the past 6 years, or between 2016 and 2022, there's definitely been a fall off of high school students going to college.
The thing that I think a lot of colleges are taking for granted too is and I just it's something that I've been saying for years and it's now become more of a mainstream opinion and there's some political pressure behind it as well, which I think is probably going to give it there's a likelihood that this will happen, I think, and I don't believe that the colleges have really thought about this so far, but I did see Peter Thiel the other day on the All In podcast, and he was talking about how the only solution he sees to the student to the student loan crisis, and this is something I've taken quite a bit of heat for saying this before, but they have to abolish the Higher Education Act. The Higher Education Act is what made student loans and brought them under the federal umbrella and allowed the government to start subsidizing them. And that is the reason that so many people send their kids. It's because there is a very simple loan vehicle, and to the point where not only is it simple, but it's a default. It's already your kids already fill it out for the most part when they graduate high school. Some high schools even have it as a they have to fill out the FAFSA in order to graduate. And so
Oh yeah, that ended up becoming. Was it a national rule? But most of the states over the past 4 to 6 years have made that a requirement
and
in
again,
order.
when I first started talking about that, people were like, "That's not true." And I said, "Yes, they're trying to pre-qualify your kids to take on debt. That's what's going on here." And people just don't see it. It's out of control. It's out of control, and it incentivizes people whenever the government subsidizes anything. It incentivizes people to take actions and make purchase decisions that they wouldn't ordinarily make because it's not actually a capitalist system. So people aren't sending their kids because it's the best option. They're sending their kids because there is a very simple, easy onboarding loan process. And if that vehicle, so one of two things I think will happen. Either one, they're going to get rid of the accreditation rule for educational products that are allowed to be funded through that. That will open the market. The other thing that I think might happen is the abolishment of the Higher Education Act. Either one of those things will cause the colleges to shrink. Because if colleges had to compete with other educational options or career and training options, they would not do very well because they don't offer job guarantees. They don't offer mentorship programs for the most part. Their career services are very subpar and ineffective, which is why colleges don't offer or don't offer job guarantees, even though they should. And so I think what's going to happen is were that to happen, and this industry is going to be obviously affected by any enrollment, but especially something drastic like that. And when you start to see people at that level, at Peter Thiel level, start saying these things out loud, it's almost like you have a 1 to 3 year horizon where things are going to start to move in that direction. I think because that tends to be what happens. They start saying something that sounds kind of crazy, and then the Overton window shifts a little bit, and suddenly you get to the point where there's legislation, and now we're looking at public loans going away, federal loans going away. And the way that student housing can really take advantage of this, because one, you're looking at about, I read a stat that it was something like 47% of parents really would prefer their kids not to go to a 4 year college. They just don't know what else to do with them. That's a problem that we solve at Degree Free, as we help parents and their kids find those options and then map out the path to it. But as parents become more comfortable with the idea of putting their kids in something else and taking a different direction, or even just not sending them to college and doing nothing and just letting their kids work right out of high school, student housing has an option to rebrand into new adult housing, which is this is where you leave the house, you get a little bit of life experience, and you don't go straight into the cold water that is adulthood, but you go from high school to somewhere where you learn a little bit of life skills, you have some roommates, you're not by yourself, you're young, you're working, like you still have a little bit of oversight, but you're able to move away from home, you're able to move to a different town or a different city, get some experience, have some community, and have this unique social experience that is probably the only real argument that colleges have that they're worth it. And
Yeah.
so that becomes something that's rather interesting that I think is a huge opportunity in a big way.
So yeah, I think that kind of brings us to an important point of how you and I met. I've got a 19-year-old, almost 20-year-old who came to us, January of her senior year, saying, "Yeah, I don't know that college is what I want to do. That I want to spend this money." And that's an important part of that because my father-in-law who passed away had left a trust for my daughter, and so we've always told her like this is going to be able to afford it would have met that average cost, right, of what a 4 year degree was going to cost. And we said, look, you've got three other siblings, like this is going to have to come from that. That's what this was meant for. And if you want to use it in some other way, that's up to you. But this has to go to your expenses. And so she between and we homeschool, so she's been able to do dual enrollment classes and stuff at at colleges, local colleges, community colleges, and stuff like that. And she's got friends that that went to were her same age, but got to go to college, a year earlier, and so she's kind of been around that. And she said, "Look, if this is college, I don't think I want to spend my money on it." And we're like, "Okay, well, glad you feel that way." But it really came from a place of just not knowing what she wanted to do. And I really thought it was an issue for us as homeschool parents because, yeah, we were able to teach a curriculum, but, we don't have a high school guidance counselor at, at our co op or anything like that. And that's where degree free came up from some other homeschool parents. And I don't even think they were clients. I think they were really just listening to the podcast and kind of understanding, um,
Yeah, 'cause you
how,
can use the method. Anybody can
yeah,
use the method.
yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. And so anyway, we started tuning into the podcast, and Peyton got really kind of hooked on it. And it came, last fall. We were like, okay, you got to decide what you're going to do. And do you want to spend the money and go through degree free? Do you want to just continue to work? Something's got to happen. There's got to be a direction. And she spent some of her money to enroll in degree free and spent several weeks with you. And what came out on the other end was not what I was expecting at all. I guess it probably was what I was expecting, but the details were just not exactly what I was expecting. And just to tell the story really quick, she's thought about doing something in the healthcare industry. I came from a family who had everybody was in healthcare industry, and it was the last thing I, I ever cared. When I was, dating girls in college, if somebody said they were a nursing student, I just immediately I didn't want to have anything else to do with them. It's because I just didn't want that. I just didn't want those table discussions or dinner discussions that I grew up with. And so, I told her, I said, look, that's fine. I said, I don't know the best way for you to really discover that and find out if that's really what you want. I can just tell you that my experience of having family members in the healthcare industry, from being nurses to doctors to EMTs, like it's the last thing I wanted for my life. And you're a lot like me, Peyton. So we need to figure that out. And I think she really did that with you. And one of the things that you kind of laid out for her was, look, best way to get to do that, or I don't know if it's the best way, but what you guys kind of settled on was actually going to phlebotomy school and getting trained in how to take blood. I mean, one of the most basic things you have to do in the healthcare industry, right? And come to find out, there's, I don't know, it was 12, 16-week course that she actually starts next month. And, once she gets done with that, she's going to be able to contract with hospitals, with insurance companies, or what have you, and be able to have a really good income for a 20-year-old and that's living with her parents, or decide if she wants to go find some roommates or whatever and live on her own. And if she ends up deciding that she likes the healthcare industry, she can now do that part time and go get her nursing degree or whatever she wants to do. And when she finished up with you and came back as, hey, this is the path I'm going to take, I was just like, wow, I wasn't expecting that at all. But that's so smart because even if if she does decide to go to nursing school or whatever path, she's got a great paying part time job that will keep her from taking on debt for college.
Mhm. As
And
I recall too, one of the reasons for that was that her schedule was really important to her and having that ability to have that flexible work. Should she decide that that's what she likes to do, and then, if she wants to have a family, which is something she's talked about, that's good part-time flexible work, and so it fit, like, the baseline for what she wanted to do, and then later she can advance should she choose to,
yeah,
and it's more just reducing the downside risk, and I think her story is a really great example of what I think most parents would choose that, which is a lower risk entry level work that's guaranteed, teaches a skill, puts something on the resume, lets you wade into a career path. And then when you're ready, then you go to college for an additional thing should you need to, like she will if she goes into something that requires a legal license to do it, like nursing.
yeah. And we're now at a stage where she's talking about, okay, this time next year, am I going to continue living with you guys? I think it's her, sis-
Right.
her sisters and brother are kind of at a point where they're kind of encroaching on her life. And, there's there's began this discussion of should I start looking for a place to live? And she's looked at rental rates and she's like, there's no way I can afford a 1 bedroom. And I'm like, yeah, you're going to have to get a roommate. And so we've already started that discussion and I've told her, I'm like, because we live between two major state universities. And I'm like, look, I know we're very close to either one of those universities. There's plenty of student housing that's around there that you can, both of those campuses, that they would love to lease to you and match you up with either either a college student or somebody that's in a similar situation. And then lo and behold, you kind of reached out to me and said, because we all right, truth be told, I've reached out to Hannah to say, hey, if you've got anybody that's in the HVAC field, I've got plenty of clients and colleagues that would love to hire folks that are in that field that, would consider apartment maintenance, apartment facilities as either a part-time job or a full-time job. And so you've started feeding me some folks and hopefully that will turn into something for those people. But it was because of that we had a good understanding of what I was doing. And about the same time, Peyton and I were having these conversations about, her future living situation. You reached out and we're kind of thinking about the same thing. So that's what has brought us to today. And I think the value that I want to make sure this is kind of going both ways to your audience, to mostly parents and those students that are or individuals that are 16 to 20 years old that are trying to think about, okay, what's going to happen from a housing perspective of I got to stay with mom and dad while I'm doing this apprenticeship or learning this skill or whatever. And no, there's actually, I mean, you were very pleased to find out that student housing doesn't mean that you have to be a student,
I was shocked.
specifically with off campus.
I was shocked. I had no idea. And the main reason is because I lived with so many roommates when I moved out when I was 18, and I would have loved to live in something where I had my own room. And because I shared a room, I wasn't too shy about that. I was like, well, it's okay, I'll share a room. But had I known that there was an option to
Yeah,
while I was fully employed, I was working full time at 18. I could have lived in student housing. I would have paid my rent on time. I never missed it. We were never late. Like,
yeah.
that would have been great.
So, my first question for you is: could you kind of walk my audience through, I guess, kind of the typical decision making journey for the students or the individuals that you're working with, and how are their needs different from traditional college students?
Sure. So I serve the 40% of college students who end up not continuing in college. And then before that, I serve 16 to 18. Our whole team serves, any 16 to 20-year-old who decides that they're going to go degree free instead. And they're going to do other options, just like Peyton, that they want practical work. They want something that's more applicable and they see results faster. And so those are the two groups that we work with. And for a lot of them, it's really, if they're considering this in high school, they just have either a general allergy towards school and they don't like it, because school is just not something that a lot of people like because it's not fun and it's not enjoyable and it's not real life, and so they don't like it. And, some of them just go, "I don't wanna continue that experience into my young adulthood. I wanna go work. I wanna go do anything else." And then another group, which tends to go into college and then realize that they didn't know what they were doing, they had no reason to be there, it's not applicable, it's too much. They're just not sure if it's going to help them get a job on the other end, which is a lot of college students now. And so for those groups, they then go, now what do I do? And then once they figure out what their career direction is, that's something that we help with. But after that, one of the things that parents have consistently asked me about is, well, like, what can they do about moving out, about housing? Because they do want them to have that experience of being adults, of being independent, but still having a little bit of structure so that they're not completely alone out on their own when they're so young, especially the 18 and 19-year-olds, they're still teenagers. And so That's something that's definitely a concern for a lot of parents, and I think that there's a massive market there that is underserved, and I think that because like I said, I this is a group that I work with. I had no idea that that was the case. I was shocked, and immediately after I told you that I didn't know that, I went around and I was on a call with parents of a 16-year-old and a 19-year-old, and they were talking about, "Yeah, we do, they do wanna move out," and I said, "Well, they can move," I said, "Did you know that they can live in off-campus student housing?" And the mom said, "What?" Mom's a former professor at, MIT, by the way, and she had no
Okay.
idea that that was the case, and, she just went, "Oh, I didn't know that," and they had been looking
Fortunately,
for.
there's not a great deal of off purpose built off campus housing in Boston, but
Oh, sure. Well, they're
that's
not in
something else.
Boston now, but
Okay.
yeah, 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 but they're, the sons, are willing to move. A couple of them wanna move into specific areas, and they just went, "Wait, what? I didn't know that," and they were extremely excited about that because it gives the community and the little bit of a step. It's a step up. It's just a little step up
Yeah.
where they can go and be independent when they turn 18, which is when the youngest one turns 18 and the 19-year-old now because he works full time, but he would love to be able to live out of his house and live on his own, just
Yeah.
have a little
Yeah.
independence.
Yeah, I'm kind of curious because developers have spent a long time evolving what the amenity package and everything looks like, the fun things like the swimming pool and the fitness center and things like that. But there's, a lot of attention that's also put to study areas and what type of equipment, what type of things go into that. And there has been a little bit of this shift in even making some of those spaces into maker spaces with podcast studios or 3D printers or things like that. I'm curious what's motivating kind of the typical student that comes through degree free or maybe not degree free, but they are going through that roadmap of not going to college, but doing something else. What are some of the things that they would like to see from an amenity standpoint or a programming standpoint of those facilities?
I think that there's a unbelievable opportunity to have specialized housing for specific types of things that people are doing. So, for instance, what you almost end up having is almost like incubators a little bit, where you have these kids that are learning a specific thing. Or what are those groups where I forget the name of them, but they're professional groups and you're only allowed to have one of each type of profession in that group? It's a networking group. What are those called?
Oh,
It's not Toastmasters, but it's something of the
yeah.
same era of, Dale Carnegie, the Carnegie groups or what have you. Anyway, there's these so to your audience, there are these professional groups. I think there's a few different franchises or companies that do this, but, they're professional networks, and they're typically, like, associated with small business chamber of commerces in areas, and then you join a network where you'll have a doctor, a CPA, a chiropractor, a dentist, different types of professions, a chef, a restaurant owner, and they're all part of the same pod of professionals. But I could see 2 different types of student housing or young adult housing, new adult housing, if you will, where maybe you have people that are trying to be, they're trying to train to be Olympic athletes or something. And, they're 18 to 20, 22 years old. And that's what they're trying to do. I could see something that's more artistic based or something that's more design based. Like you have a bunch of graphic designers in one, or you have a bunch of HVAC techs in one, or you have a bunch of pilots in one. That's a good example. And they would probably just be regionally, they'll end up being close to whatever sort of learning center is there.
Yeah.
So, but I see them not being college anymore. Cause I think if you remove I think that off-campus housing has the potential to replace the social aspect of college.
Hmm.
Because really what those young adults need is they just want a little bit of independence and they want a place to go learn where they're not completely out in the cold by themselves, but they're away from home. And that is something that I think that if they do that correctly, they could replace the social aspect of college because your social identity would be more associated with the community of people that you lived with as opposed to college.
Gotcha. And so help me kind of paint this profile or avatar is probably a better way to describe it of what a degree free student in terms of, I mean, life stages obviously very similar to a college student, but do they tend to want to be local to wherever, their permanent address is, and how quickly are they going into part-time work? Because I think that obviously dictates a lot of schedules and things like that. And I'm just kind of curious because everything in student housing is based off of an academic calendar as far as lease terms are concerned.
Sure.
They move in middle to late August, and leases are ending at the end of July. So it's not a full 365 days. So, it's a funny thing that we always talk about. It's a term lease in student housing that's divided into 12 equal installments. So there's no like proration of rent or anything like that. And
Sure.
so I'm just kind of curious, what do you think some of those more flexible terms need to be?
Oh, that's interesting. Well, that's a good way to drive, it's a good way to drive urgency, I guess, too, is if you just, you do intake twice a year, maybe. Because
Really just once, but it does end up being, on a semester. A lot of times you'll have a lot of students that will end up,
oh, like half. Yeah.
yeah, I mean, certainly for like graduating seniors or what have you, when that's obviously known in advance, a lot of times a student property will offer them a short-term lease with some type of premium on it or whatever,
Sure.
to help with
Sure.
that. But a lot of times, especially where you see like they either decide school's not for them or they want to go, abroad and study for a semester, they'll either terminate their lease and pay some kind of buyout fee, or they'll find someone to sublease the apartment. So, or sublease their room.
Mm.
But yeah, I'm just kind of curious as to would that typically fit for a non-traditional student?
I probably would because it's and really too, what's cool about this is that it's so funny, but that non-traditional label, I realize that when you filter for when your customers college students, obviously you're going to get parents who are able to send their kids to college typically also have more disposable income to spend on student housing. That's just
Yeah,
a this is default of the customer segment that you're serving. But 60% of the employed workforce is degree free. And so you actually expand your market quite a bit. And then now that so many of that typical college demographic, like those 18 to 20-year-olds don't want to go anymore and their parents don't want to send them, you're expanding the group that you can serve quite a bit if you start doing that. And also you could in a way if you could change the options for when people can sign up for the leases. But yeah, every 6 months I could see that being something that okay, we're going to plan for you to go and we're going to plan for you to go in August. We're going to plan for you to go in January. And they just start but that gives people 2 ends a year where they're figuring out what their child's doing. So if their child, let's say their child is in a software development or cybersecurity boot camp, let's say that. Let's use that as an example. And they decide they're going to go into the cybersecurity boot camp and they're a couple months in and a lot of those boot camps are like 9 months to a year. They go, okay, you're going to study for 9 months to a year. So do you want to go, do you want to move out? Do you want to go live in student housing? Do you want to go live in new adult housing or launch housing
yeah,
or whatever you want to call it?
watch housing. There
Launch
we go.
housing, it sounds good, right?
Yeah,
But like, do you want to go live in launch housing? And they go, yeah, that'd be great. And then they go, oh yeah, I'm just gonna go live in, the next town over near so and so. Like they have a friend that lives a couple towns over. This is really common actually. They'll have a friend that lives in another city that they would love to like be near, because the older they get, the more likely their friends are kind of dispersed. So they go, "Oh, yeah, I'd love to live near so and so or go live near this family member or grandma or these cousins or what have you." And then they can go and they can study and, you now are making money off of somebody who would have otherwise just been at home because the parents are spending significantly less money because they're not spending money on college. And so because they're not spending money on college, they're more willing to spend on their kids' housing because it's still less than they would pay for an individual lease on a single apartment. And
yeah,
and it solves the community aspect, it's safe, it's like it's kind of a no-brainer, honestly.
yeah. Let's talk a little bit about marketing. There's some big, national operators in this space that I would probably tell them, hey, you should go sponsor Hannah's podcast. And
Yeah, 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 because they
so
they will make that is something that I think is so valuable, that sense of community and just being able to get out of the house and just feel like, "Oh, I'm in charge of myself."
yeah, but to talk a little bit about marketing and getting in front of those folks, I think we ended up. I know it was some word of mouth stuff, but I think the first content that we saw, for your stuff was probably TikTok, and I'm sure. You didn't just do that on a whim. I'm sure there was some purpose into going to TikTok specifically. So I'm kind of curious, are there parts of outreach that if a property is saying, hey, we've got to start servicing, these non-traditional students, or these, call them degree free students, I think is a great name for it and a great title for it. Is there a certain place they should be putting marketing dollars? I guess is what I'm getting
Yeah,
at.
if
And
I think a
w-
lot of it
w-
is not even marketing dollars, it's just their messaging. If they say, if your child
exactly.
is yeah, it's just change the language. You change your words, you change your outcome, and so that's part of the reason why the naming our company Degree Free was such a powerful thing because, have you ever seen somebody call someone tell you that they're a college dropout? Have you ever seen somebody do that? When they
Yeah.
do, they just shrink into themselves. It's
Yeah.
ridiculous. You'll see people who are making, I've seen guys who are wildly successful, huge, like huge in life, huge in skill, huge in wisdom, and been very educated in different areas of business or writers even. And they'll say, yeah, I dropped out, and they just become so small, and it's ridiculous. It's laughable. I'm like, I'm sorry, you're very educated. You are a professional. You run a very successful company. You employ 100 people. Why are you why do you care they didn't buy a bachelor's degree? And it's generational too. That's less of a thing now. The group I'm talking about is older, but for them, it's the language. And so if you start talking to these parents, just tell them like, hey, you if you're trying to launch your 18 to 22-year-old and they don't want to go to college, that's okay. They can
Yeah.
you can bring them to us and you can give them that independence while they pursue something else. And if student housing, like off-campus student housing, people want to screen for like really, if they're looking for a certain type of applicant, just look for somebody who's working part-time or studying something part-time. It just doesn't have to be college related. If they're working part-time, I would argue that that's a pretty good case that they're going to be a solid tenant too. Like you have to
Yeah.
be doing something actively to live here. You have to be, you have to be employed, you have to be whatever, or
Yeah.
just market towards that group. If your student
Yeah.
is working part-time or working full-time instead of going to college, you're 19-year-old and you want to help them move out, here we are. Look at how simple this is. No, they don't have to sign up for utilities, they don't have to find roommates, they don't have to this. They can just show up.
I think it makes so much sense. So, in addition to the messaging and the marketing, and then we talked a little bit about physical spaces and what that could look like. Just from a collaborative standpoint, are there other things that property managers and operators of these facilities, even national operators, should be looking to, be it collaborating with degree free specifically, or just collaborating with other, I hate saying off campus resources because I think that ties too much to things that are happening with the university, but other medical facilities that are working with a lot of degree free students, like is that something that they should be spending time towards? Is there something from a resident programming standpoint that they should be focused on?
I think probably if you were trying to solve the parent's next problem there and you were able to throw some money or some labor behind it, some support behind it for parents, once you've solved their roof over their child's head problem, the next two things they'll be worried about are they'll be worried about their health, like you just said, and they'll also be worried about their career placement. So, specifically, having people that are able to help them with because one thing that colleges just spectacularly fails at, the college career centers are just not effective. They do not work. A lot of it, I think, is because they're run by people who work in academia. They don't work in real life, and so they just don't know how to get a job. They've literally never had one off a college campus, so it's just not the same thing. Simply because it's so rigid in a college in a college environment, a lot of college professors so for parents, just to know the numbers, but something like, I think it's less than 10% of humanities or liberal arts professors have ever worked a job outside of academia, and if they have, it was literally 20 years ago. So that could be a barista, like they've never
Yeah.
they have no work experience outside of academia, so they really don't know, what kids are going into. They don't know what they need to know. Like, they don't know the median salary that the grads are gonna go in. They know nothing about the job market. And even the business professors and the STEM professors, a lot of them and I don't mean like, biology and because a lot of them have never also worked in any outside of academia until they get to a PhD level, and then they'll do some sort of consulting project outside of a college, which again is not what a graduate is going to experience when they come out with a bachelor's degree. So, if there's a way to help specific individual support. So, let's use our sommelier example, but let's say somebody's studying for their SOM certification and they go, "Oh, how do I format my resume in a way that's gonna get, that's gonna get seen?" Or is this, should I have a headshot on this resume? Things like that. Even things
Yeah.
they can Google, but they just might need, or use AI for, but they just need a person to just look over and like, "Oh, that's right," or "That looks good," or "This looks bad." And it should just be somebody with some practical life experience that has actually worked. Like, and that's great. Just, "Hey, this is how you interview. Hey, this is honey, when you're first interviewing for your job, this is how you negotiate." Just things like that, that are just super helpful and super practical. Obviously, the life
Yeah.
skill thing would be good too, but I think just, "Hey, don't wear that to the interview. Put on a polo." Just things like that, you know?
Yeah.
Like,
No, I think and the great thing about that is that regardless if they're degree free or degree debt,
universally useful.
that's gonna work for everybody.
Yeah.
So
Because that is one of the reasons I think so many grads are struggling is, like, they don't know how to interview, they don't know how to write resumes, and there's nobody to help them do that.
perfect. Hannah, thanks so much for spending time with us today and just and really kind of helping my audience through understanding a little bit more on this new type of 16 to 20-year-old that especially when they're in the latter part of 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 that age group, how they can help assist them and kind of be on the lookout for them because I do think, I mean, the numbers those were percentage numbers that we were looking at, not the total numbers. The total numbers have fallen off significantly as we're getting closer and closer to this enrollment cliff and with everything else that's going on in higher ed. But then to also look at the number the percentage of students that are just saying, yeah, this isn't worth it. One from obviously a business perspective, there's a lot of student housing that has been built over the past 3 decades, as millennials were coming through and a lot of those at tier two, tier three schools that I think a lot of the university systems in each state are kind of looking at, hey, what do we do with this campus? Because our state is losing students, and do we wrap this campus up into something else? Do we do something different with it? I think that's going to be a real issue that a lot of these off-campus properties are going to have to. There's a trend now, and everybody is aware of it. And I'm actually working on one right now, where instead of converting, there used to be a day where we would look at potentially buying an existing apartment community and converting it into student housing. And now it's going the other way. A lot of stuff that was purpose built for student housing is now being converted into conventional housing because the demographics for that area just
Oh, I've
happen to
changed.
match up and that makes the most sense. And I think we're probably going to see more and more of that. So I think thinking about the degree free student that is out there or students that are out there is something that managers and marketers have certainly got to keep front of mind. So thanks so much for sharing. Anything else we should be thinking about?
I think for your audience, if you have young adults who are in your housing or you have managers that are have become guidance counselors in a way and they've tapped out their knowledge of how to help these young adults figure out what to do, please do send them our way, degreefree.com/launch. We help them figure out what they need from their work. We help them figure out what jobs fit what they need. We help them figure out what actual skills they need to learn, licenses, certifications, what order makes sense for them. And then we tell them how much it costs, where they need to go, what they need to do, how to apply, like what's the plan from tomorrow so that you're moving forward so they don't get stuck. And that could serve two purposes. One, it's something to do with these young adults if they are going to leave your housing and you want to help push them forward in their life. And then two, if they want to stay in housing, but their parents want them to continue to do something useful, then they have something to do where they might still want to stay. And so it could solve one of two problems in a different way for, for your customer. So that's something that I would say that's my plug for my business, but I do think that there's a big big alignment for the ways that this industry can just slightly pivot with very little difficulty. And honestly, it's just
Yeah.
changing the marketing message. And you can reach an entirely new demographic. And I think that demographic would be extremely excited to put their kids in there if they said, "Hey, we can help them launch into adulthood, into independence in a way that makes parents feel secure, safe, and happy that they took that step with their child."
Yeah. No, that's so important because a lot of off-campus property managers will end up, there's very few of us that have the opportunity of having a freshman as a resident. And that's a whole different kind of special. And so most of them are coming to us sophomore and junior year. And that's when it's like a couple of switches have kind of flipped. Like, okay, I've got this, I'm doing this school thing. I'm focused on a degree now, potentially, or I'm thinking about choosing a major. And all of a sudden, it's like these switches start going off of what in the hell am I actually doing here?
Beginning of sophomore year, 19-year-olds is like a huge there's a big shift, exactly as you said, where they just go, "I don't wanna do this, but what do I do?"
Yeah, yeah. And it's funny how many, property managers have told me they end up being guidance counselors and therapists because they are, and for a lot of these students, they're one of the few adults that's in their life, outside of their professors, and they're certainly not going to have that conversation with their professor.
No.
And so, yeah, I think a lot of times the property managers end up finding themselves in that situation where they are the only ones that this student can be honest with.
Yeah.
I think, yeah, this is a fantastic resource for them to be able to either refer the student or their parent. Did you get a lot of students that come without their parents, or is it mostly?
We do, but personally, I think that it's the kind of thing that when they're in that phase of life, their parents really need to be involved because they're just not
Yeah,
eh, they're not informed enough about life in general,
yeah.
which is the problem that we're trying to solve, but their parents need to be involved in that to decide if that's a good step for them, for their family, that.
Great. And again, that's degreefree.com/launch.
Degreefree.com/launch. And if you Google it, it's the Degree Free Launch Program. That's our service that we do for young adults, our career planning service.
Perfect. Well, thanks so much, and we'll talk to you soon.
All right. Thanks, Wes.
Thanks. Well, again, a big thanks to Hannah for taking some time out and speaking to this audience. I think there's a lot there that we've certainly got to think about, both as what the future of higher ed looks like, as well as how we can evolve with what's going on in the world around higher ed and how students are responding to these things. So looking forward to hearing back from you guys on ideas and thoughts that you've had about this conversation and specifically about what Hannah presented. So would love to get your direct messages and emails and all that kind of stuff from all the different channels that you guys typically reach out to me with. So please give me your feedback on that. Hey, I wanted to, before we said goodbye, I wanted to make sure that you guys are certainly aware of some things that are going on here from an event standpoint and some things that we've got going up. So, the best way to stay in touch with everything that we're doing is at our website, and which is studenthousinginsight.com. We've got all of our content listed there under the content tab as well as events. But let me just bring it up here really quick. I want to go through, as you'll see here on our homepage, we've actually got a banner that we just recently put up stating that SHI is awarding scholarships for LeaseCon TurnCon 2025. If you're not aware of what LeaseCon TurnCon is, that is one of the biggest operations focused conferences that we have in our industry. It's put on by Interface Conference Group. We are giving away 3 scholarships for site level or regional level managers to attend, because we understand, especially if you're site level, the continuing education budget is not always that big, and so we want to help out 3 folks that are within the industry that would love to attend LeaseCon TurnCon. LeaseCon TurnCon is coming up in December. It's December 8th and 9th. And unfortunately, I don't have a event page for that just yet, but we'll post it in the show notes. But again, LeaseCon TurnCon is happening December 8th through 9. Yeah, that's correct. 8th and 9th. And that's going to be in Charlotte, North Carolina. And you can simply just click on this apply now banner and it will take you to a forum where you can get more information and apply. Also, if you've got colleagues, maybe they don't listen to the podcast, or maybe you just want to certainly call them out and platform them and say, "Hey, we really like what you're doing." So, regardless if it's a supervisor or if it's someone that you're supervising and you think they should definitely attend this and I've got what it takes to be a leader in this industry, I would certainly ask you to nominate them. Once you click on that, you can either nominate someone or you can self apply. So that is that's what I wanted to show you there. And then if you go to the events section, you'll see upcoming events that we've got coming up on September 24th. BisNow is doing their National Student Housing Digital Summit. Got a discount code there and a link to their website where you can register and also get a $15 discount. It is a webinar based type of summit. So it's not something you're going to have to travel for or anything like that. But that's coming up on September 24th. And then in October, on October 20th through the 22nd, we've got the NMHC Student Housing Conference that is going to be in Scottsdale, Arizona. This is an annual conference and the longest running student housing conference that there is. And just guys at the National Multifamily Housing Council do a fantastic job of putting that event together and covering some great topics that we all need to be paying attention to. One other thing that is happening during the NMHC conference is we are doing our 2025 Top Golf Mixer. This is something that this will be the third year that we're doing it. We've been doing it in coordination with the NMHC Student Housing Conference. It will be on October 21st in Scottsdale, just a couple miles down from the Grand Hyatt Resort where the conference is taking place at. But what is especially exciting for this one is this is also going to be a fundraiser for the College Student Mental Wellness Advocacy Coalition, and specifically their partner, the How Are You Project, which we've featured several times on the podcast and on Shop Talk. And so great organization there that we're trying to raise money for as the coalition gets ready to launch their survey for this year that comes out after move-in day. And then we've got a lot of other great resources that the How Are You Project is trying to put together for the student housing industry. So make sure you go there. And if you're going to be going to NMHC, make sure that you specifically, this is an open invite to all owners and operators and developers within the space. If you're a service provider, we do have several sponsorship opportunities for you. So make sure that you check those out. You can click on that right there in the middle of the page. It says sponsorship info for vendors and suppliers, and you can request more information. Well, guys, thanks so much. I look forward to hopefully seeing you at a conference or on a webinar in the near future, and we'll talk to you soon. Take care.